Today we're fortunate to have with us Rodney Kephart. He's a ex-prisoner of war. Home is currently at Stanley, North Dakota, west of Minot. He had a varied experience in World War II, starting in Wake Island, ending up in prison camps in Japan and so on. And it's now our privilege to hear Rodney tell his story. So you just go ahead, Rodney, and tell us how you won the war or whatever you did. So just go right ahead.
I'm Rodney Kephart, K-E-P-H-A-R-T, and I was born in Iowa, Spencer, Iowa, in 1917. So, and we moved to we lived there for a couple of years after I was born, and then we moved up to South Dakota. And Dad had a farm up there, and I was the sixth one of 7 boys, and we had 2 sisters, and they were the youngest in the family. And my 2 sisters and I are all that are surviving at this time. We have from Clear Lake, where we moved from Iowa, we moved up to Goodwin, and we were on a farm up there when my father died when I was 8 years old. And then from there, we went over to Troy, South Dakota, and bought a farmstead, and found out that the farm was made out of quackgrass, so we lost everything. And then Mother moved into a farmstead at Stockholm, and where we finished grade school, and I went to high school in Strandberg. And then from there, I went out to Idaho. I grabbed a freight train, went out to Idaho when I was 19 and to be with my brother. And so I spent a summer out there and went to California and then came back. And by that time I was convinced that I was supposed to go to school, so I started pre-seminary training at Bethel in St. Paul. And in the spring of 1941, I had run out of money, and so my brother, who was in Idaho, sent me a check to ticket to come out on the train. He says they're building an air base at Mountain Home, and you can probably make enough money to go back next fall. So I went out there, and when I got to Boise, the Friday that I got in there, they had just laid off 65 people at the air base at Mountain Home, and everybody was talking about the Pacific Islands. And Morris Knutson, one of the prime contractors, lived in Boise, and so I went down and talked to them and come back, signed up to go to the Pacific Islands. Well, that was the first part of March, but we never left there till the end of April because the barracks weren't ready at Wake Island, so they were holding back on sending people over. So then we went down to Alameda and took a boat over to Honolulu, and there was still a delay at Wake, so we spent 30 days at Pier 31A at Honolulu, where they loaded out all the supplies for the Pacific Islands. And so I worked there at the Pier 31A for about a month, and then I ended up at Wake. I got there on the 3rd of May of 41, and the first job that I had was they put me to digging a ditch, and then they came and wanted to know anybody that wanted to work in the carpenter shop, and I dropped my shovel in a hurry and went to the carpenter shop, and so I was there then as a carpenter. And while I was there, I conducted services in the mess hall every Sunday, kind of a freelance missionary. We'd do some singing and have some teaching and stuff on Sunday morning, so there were quite a number that came out for that. And so that was kind of the routine. We were building an air base at Wake Island. Wake Island is one of the coral atolls that grew up around a old volcano. It's Wake is probably about the size of a North Dakota farm, 2.5 to 3.5 square miles. The highest point on the island is 17 feet, and the water around Wake Island is 7,600 feet deep, so, and laden with sharks, so it was kind of no way to get out of there, so we were there for a while. But anyway, that was, Wake Island is located about 2,200 miles southwest of Honolulu. Midway is about 14, and then it's about 14 from Midway down to Wake, but Midway is north and west, so it's kind of a big dog leg going that way. It's about 2,200 miles across. And everything was nice at Wake Island. The temperature varied from 78 to 82 degrees, and we had fish in the lagoon. We could, all of the things of a nice tropical island, until we were suddenly surprised on December the 8th, which was the same day as Pearl Harbor, except we were on the other side of the date line. And we were working I was working at the shop, and we heard an explosion, and I ran out back on the platform at the back end of the shop and looked up into the eyes of the Japanese gunners in the side of the plane. They were about treetop high, and they were just spraying everything with machine gun fire, and the rocks were jumping all over, but I never got a scratch. So anyway, from there, this was about 11:20 on the morning, and everybody went into the mess hall then for dinner, and but after we had our noon meal, I went over to the hospital. I told the boss at the carpenter shop, there isn't anything I can do here, and about that time there was truckloads of wounded and dead and wounded being going by towards the hospital. So I went up and spent the night at the hospital doing whatever I could, and that night we run 21 patients through surgery between 9 o'clock that night and 1 o'clock the next morning. And after about 8 o'clock I was relieved, and the doctor said, well, you better get some rest. And I decided, well, to look for some place to get some rest, and there was a empty room at the end of the corridor in the hospital, and I thought, well, this is ideal because there's 2 beds in there, and I could just go in there and be handy if they needed me. And I tried 3 times to go into that room, and it was just as though someone was standing in the door. Well, today I know that there was an angel standing there, because about 11 o'clock that morning, the Japanese came by with their second strike and dropped an incendiary bomb in that room that burned the hospital. So then from there, we were on, as soon as we had gotten over that strike, why, we were given orders to everybody dig in and report for work at sundown. So we dug ourselves a dugout, and then we began to move guns for the Marines. Of course, I was a carpenter. I wasn't a Marine. I hadn't had any boot training or anything else. We just went right from the cut-off saw to the doctor's to the hospital, and then to moving guns with the Marines. We would move the guns every night. We'd push them back into the brush and sandbag them and pack the ammunition back there, and the next morning they'd come by and bomb where we'd left a camouflage in the place where the gun was before. So that's the only way we kept our guns. To go back a little bit and give you an idea of the personnel and stuff that was at Wake Island, we had about 1,200 contract workers. We had some over 400 Marines. We had a communications unit from the Army, and we had a submarine base task force that were beginning to prepare for a submarine base there. So all told, we had about 1,700 men at Wake Island. And our equipment, our armor, or whatever you'd call it, we had 12 Grumman planes, and the Japanese got 7 of those on the ground the first day. There was 4 were out on reconnaissance. Then on the, so we had 4 that would fly and 1 for parts. And as far as guns were concerned, we had 3 5-inch anti-aircraft that had been salvaged off of reconditioned battleships from World War I. And we had 5 3-inch anti-aircraft that had likewise been salvaged off of reconditioned ships. And that was the total heavy artillery we had. We had probably 50 machine guns of 50 and 30 caliber, then our handguns and our field rifles, and what grenades we had, which didn't amount to anything. That was our total. And we had no radar or anything like that. On the morning of the 12th, the Japanese tried to make an invasion, and we had 1 Marine and 12 contractors workers on a 12-inch, on one of the 5-inch guns, and the Japanese cruiser was pulling by, and we shot over it the first time and shot short the second time, and the third time they dropped the 5-inch missile into the powder magazine, so the cruiser parted in the middle and was gone. So the Japanese said we had to have some 16-inch guns there because you couldn't sink a cruiser with a 5-inch gun. But that's what had happened. And we had the communications was just lines strung on top of the ground, So it was a very, we were short-handed more ways than one. But at the time that we were in the prison camp there at Wake before we left for Japan, one of the guards had told us that they lost 10,000 men at Wake Island, and we lost 159. We accounted for 12 surface craft and 2 submarines and 27 aircraft. And one of those was a troop transport with 4,000 Japanese on it. That one of the Grummans went out and laid a 250-pound bomb down the funnel of it and came back after for a couple more bombs, and he went back out and there was an oil slick there. So, but that's kind of the way the war went. And then on the morning of the 23rd of December, when the Japanese came in, and we surrendered then on the morning of the 23rd of December, which was the other side of the date line again, so it was 22nd was the official day. But anyway, we were told to come up out of the brush, and as we were coming out of the brush, why the Japanese were flying their little fighters around there, and we saw one of the anti-aircraft shoot down one of the fighters while we were coming up out of the brush. But anyway, when we come up to surrender, they told us to strip naked, so we just dropped our clothes. I was a little behind the rest of them, so I was all by myself, so I made one little pile of my own clothes, but everybody else had to throw theirs in the big pile. So after we'd been checked through and abused a little, then we were let to get our clothes, so I just went back and got my own clothes. So somebody was watching over me at that time, I know. Anyway, the next process was to assemble all of the prisoners over on the airport, and they were transporting us on stake bed trucks, and they crowded as many as they could get in, and I was standing right back by the back corner of the thing, and this Japanese comes and hands me his gun so he can get up on there. So at that point there wasn't even a thought in my mind of doing anything but holding that gun for him. I mean, when you surrender, I mean, we stood there before these soldiers with drawn bayonets, and we knew that from then on everything was in their hands. We were completely out of control. And that had transferred within me, so, I mean, I was an obedient slave at that point. And but I've often thought of the incident many times as how stupid could a soldier be giving one of his prisoners his gun, you know. But anyway, from there they divided up. They took all but 425 of us into Japan on the 12th of January. They went, well, there was a bunch they took off and put into the people that were in charge. They wanted to do some questioning and all that kind of stuff, but they pulled them all out of it. But the main group went to Wusong, China, and so they were over there, and I was in the bunch that stayed at Wake Island. And then in June, there was 25 that were taken off that had healed up from their war wounds so that they could travel. And then in October of '42, the Japanese made a list of the people that they wanted to keep at Wake Island. Where's that little plaque there, the small one? Yeah. This is a list of the 98 men that were kept at Wake Island. And I was on that list to stay at Wake Island. And they got all of the boat was all loaded, and the doctor, Dr. Shank, said, I don't want to be the lone medical officer with these 98 men. He said, there's a Milton Dreyer down here that I would like to have. He was a nurse. So they took me out and put me on the boat and brought Milton Dreyer back to stay with them. So then, a year later, on October of 1943, the Americans bombed Wake Island for 72 hours, consecutive bombing.
By air or ground, or ships?
By air.
By air.
They said they dumped more high explosives on those 2.5 square miles than was dumped on any 2.5 square miles in the rest of the war.
Now, how many Americans now were there on the Wake Island?
Well, these 98 were there.
These 98 were there?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the 98 were there, and so after
Here.
they bombed them for the 4th, 5th, and 6th, and on the 7th, they took them out on the beach and executed them. And there was the place where they executed them is right along the channel where the current goes out to sea, so that's probably why they did it. But on Wake Island, there's what we call the POW rock. Here it says 98 U.S. prisoners of war, 5 October 43. So evidently, while they were under siege on the middle day, that they hiding out, everybody would probably hiding out, and some of them inscribed that rock. And that rock is there today, and it's got a plaque. This plaque is by there with the names of the 98 on it, and it's got a plaque, brass plaque on it identifying it as
the Japanese just shot those men then?
Yeah, they took a machine gun.
And then they just washed them out to sea or pushed them into the water, and the water carried them
They
away.
have no idea what happened to them, but that's...
There was a current there that carried, they weren't buried there.
No. But then...
now, where were you now when this happened? Were you in Japan?
I was in Japan.
Okay.
But, see, to finish that part of the story, I've jumped up for a year. So,
yeah.
Well, then when we left Wake Island then in October of 42, we went into Sasebo, Japan.
You went on a ship now, Japanese ship.
Japanese, yeah. Hachimaru, we called it. Got up to 45 degrees centigrade down in the hole. So it was a pretty hot place. And there wasn't room enough. Well, it was the cargo hold in an oil tanker is what it was. So can we cut this off?
Okay.
I gotta go.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hang on a second, sir.
Now, Rodney, we were just talking about those men that were executed there on the island.
Yeah.
And washed out to sea. And you, by now, were in Japan. You'd gotten there on a ship, and you were telling about this ship. Could you tell us a little more about the ship and what the food was and the water and how long it took you and little details like that before you got to Japan or on the way to Japan?
We boarded the Nidamaru, they called it. It was a oil tanker with a cargo, and we were put in the cargo hold on this oil tanker. And we didn't have room enough so that we could all lay down at night. Some of us had to sit up. And there wasn't, they'd put down a bucket. I mean, the food was let down to us in buckets, and we had to distribute it between us and stuff like that. The temperature was almost unbearable. It got up as high as 45 degrees centigrade in the hole down there, and about the 4th day out, some of the fellows started passing out from the ammonia, from the perspiration, and finally they let us up every day for a few minutes on top side to get a little air, but other than that, we were confined down to that hole. And as I remember, it took us 14 days to get into Yokohama Harbor. And when we came into Yokohama Harbor that night, the ship hit something, I don't know what it was, but they stopped suddenly, and we heard them drop the sounding chain down to see if there's any water in the billows. And so anyway, they moved us on in later, and when we got into Japan, then we were transferred onto a train at Yokohama, and we spent 36 hours on this train going down to Moji, to cross over onto the southern island of Kyushu. And on the train had a straight back between two flat deals, and we sat on there for 36 hours. And the fellow that sat across me, we'd sit and sleep on each other's shoulder, just leaning across. There's no way of getting anywhere. And what we got to eat there was a rice ball and a piece of salt salmon about twice as big as your thumb that was burned dry with rock salt. So it was, and then we didn't get any water to drink, so it was pretty tough going. Then when we got down to Moji, they put us on a tugboat and took us across to the other island, and we're loaded on trucks then and taken over to Fukuoka. And when we came into Fukuoka, they let us off at and marched us up through town. And the Japanese were told that we were newly captured prisoners from the South Pacific. And here we'd been prisoners for over a year. And but then we were loaded on trucks again and taken up to the dam site where they were building a water supply dam, and we worked on that for 18 months up there.
Now this was your first camp?
Yeah,
that was a prisoner of war camp. A work camp.
It was the first work camp in Japan. We'd been slave labor at Wake Island for 9 months already. But the camp in Japan, Camp 18, today there's no record in we can't find any Japanese record of this camp at all. Every person that was in charge of that camp were tried and executed for war crimes, for the brutality in the camp. And we went into the camp with 251 men, and we had...
These are Americans now.
Yeah. And we had 7 added to us from sunken ships and other things that they'd bring in from time to time. And we left there 18 months later with 98 men. So we buried almost over 60 people at Camp 18.
In a graveyard right by camp?
Well, on the hillside there below the dam.
Did they give an identification when they buried them of some
Well,
type?
yes, I acted as the chaplain. I had a complete record of who died and what they did, when they died, and all of that, and the plot of where they were buried and the whole thing. And when I was repatriated, I turned it over to the chaplain on the SS Haven at Nagasaki, and never heard from him. But that was the record, the only record that there was of him. And so it's been pretty disappointing to find out that a record like that turned over to the chaplain of a ship and you never hear from him. I mean, it's more devastating than going through the prison camp almost. So anyway, that's another story, and it's part of the story, and it's down the line. But anyway, from Sasebo, then we went over to...
Well, what did you do at this camp now, were you as a laborer?
Well, we were building a water supply dam, so we worked, they'd brought the cement over the mountain from the waterfront on a tram line, and we had to take it from the tram line into the warehouse, and then 5 bags would come in every about 20 times an hour and dump them on the platform, and we had to pick them up and get them into the warehouse. And at that time, I weighed about 125 pounds, and the cement bags weighed 50 kilos, which would be 112 pounds. So, and then some of the fellows worked at the rock crusher. They would feed the rock crusher, and they'd bring in the aggregate. And some of the others would work at where the tram line brought in sand, and so this is the kind of work we did, and building that water supply dam.
What kind of food did you get, or where'd you sleep and so on?
Well, the barracks, if you can call that, was the abandoned cement warehouse, which was made with Japanese rough sawed lumber that I suppose it was a centimeter thick, but it was just rough sawed and nailed up lap siding type, and that would curl and crack and everything, and you could see through the sides of it. And in the wintertime over there, it got down to 4 or 5 above, get snow on the ground and stuff, so it was irregular. I froze my feet so that I lost all my toenails, and my heels turned black and peeled, and all of that type of thing. The Japanese gave us Navy shoes, which is their split-toed shoes that the Navy has, so that, well, the idea of the split toe is so they can climb rope with it. And but they're just a canvas shoe that snaps together in the back. And we didn't have any socks. While we were at the warehouse, we used to take the cement paper bags and wrap our feet in them to keep them warm and slip these things on them. And we'd also take cement bags and slip them in. I could slip a cement bag right up under my arm. I'd slip right in it. I mean, that's how skinny I was. And then we'd put another one across our shoulders under our jacket to get some insulation to keep the body heat in. So then from there we were transferred over to Fukuoka, where we built an airstrip, and we excavated drain ditches onto narrow gauge railroad and pushed them up onto the fill and dump them, and then we'd go back down, wading in water up to our knees, and this we did up until into November, when we were transferred into Nagasaki shipyards, and we were in there and worked in the shipyards there until the 21st of April of 45.
What kind of work did you do in the shipyard there, food and so on?
Well, the food was, well, we got what they called cereal. It was part rice and usually kaffir corn or rolled barley or soybeans that were half cooked and that kind of thing. And then we'd get a soup usually made out of, they'd flay the fish for the Japanese and they'd put the rest of it in and make soup out of it for us. And then we got some, well, lettuce was the main, or daikons, these white radishes. That was usually the main part of the soup. So,
get that once a day or twice a day or so? Or?
Well, we get it twice a day. We get it in the morning and then we get it in the evening when we got in. And this is what they call a bento. This is what they'd...
See, I'll hold it up here, we can see it here.
This is what... That was the supply of rice that we got to take along to eat during the day.
They filled that up with rice or with that food. That was for your ration for the day.
That was, well, we'd take that with us when we went out, and then when we came in at night, we'd get our other ration.
Yeah, in a bowl or something.
Yeah.
Now, what about these chopsticks? I see this laying here.
Yeah.
Can you tell me when you used those, or
well,
did you get proficient in those, or?
Well, no, it was pretty hard to eat soup with a chopstick, so I had my buddy made me a spoon out of a piece of brass, and I kept pinned in.
Put that right in here. We can show it.
I kept pinned inside of my shirt so that they couldn't find it. Otherwise, they'd probably taken it because it was metal.
But you kept that metal box with you then all the time.
Well, you took it out with you when you went out in the field to work.
And you brought it back to the States after the war.
Yeah, I kept it.
Yeah.
Well, after they surrendered, why, they wasn't there to do anything. Now this is
You can hold it up over here, maybe.
this one is ivory.
Which one?
This one, made out
the heavy
of,
one, yeah. Okay.
And this one is made out of mahogany, and these two are made out of bamboo. And this is a little carrier that the Japanese carry their chopsticks in.
Did each Japanese soldier or guard have one of those then?
Well, you never knew.
No. But did you carry that with you, or did you get that after the war?
Well, I got picked that up after the war. From the camp in Nagasaki, then we were transferred out to the coal mine at Iwata. And
you say you were at Nagasaki?
In the shipyards, yeah. We left there on the 21st of April, 21st of June, before the bomb was dropped there in August.
So you're fairly familiar then with Nagasaki when you...
No, well, not very familiar. We just were in a camp there.
Yeah. Now, were there Americans at Nagasaki when they dropped the bombs?
Well, we were there. Prisoners, there were prisoners there.
When they dropped the bomb?
Yeah.
Were they killed?
No, they were over, well, I have a friend down in South Dakota was there when, but they were out of the basin where the bomb.
Yeah, sure.
See, if you were behind an intervening hill or something, I mean, it made an awful lot of difference.
Sure.
It could be cut off.
Yeah. Okay. cartridges. Now, were those used by the Americans, or you found them someplace?
Yeah, they were from Wake Island. One
Now, Rodney, you were at Nagasaki, and then you, working in the shipyard, then you left there. Where did you go then? Or let me say this. Before you went to that camp, maybe you could tell us a couple things about these things on the table here.
Okay.
We got these, for example, this plaque here, and we got little posts here, and we got, tell us what's on the table here.
Okay, let's start here right next to me. Now this is a belt that I made out of cement sack string. I tied it with square knots like a sailor would tie a square knot. And by whether you tie the square knot right or left, you can turn it and make all kinds of designs. So I have my 1943, the year I made it, and I got my initials in it. And it's about 22 inches long, so I wore it for 2 years over there. The buckle is made out of the anchor emblem off of one of the Japanese trucks, which I folded together and made this. This cane is made out of ironwood from Wake Island. This is a cowrie stone from Wake Island.
Coral stone, yeah.
Cowrie.
Oh, cowrie, okay.
And the eyes are mother of pearl, and the tip down here is part of a Japanese airplane. And this is native ironwood from Wake Island.
That's a cane. Did you ever use that cane, or you just made it?
I used it for a while when we first got the first winter in Japan.
Yeah.
This is chopsticks that there's a ivory one and a wooden one and a couple of.
Yeah.
Okay. This plaque I made at Wake Island. The black wood and the red wood here is native wood from Wake Island. The white wood is from the bowling alley that they were building for the contractors there. And the back of it is Philippine mahogany from the Pan American Air Station. And I carved this out, made it with a jackknife. And I used a bedpost under my bunk with a plank to make a press to press it together when I glued it.
That was with the jackknife that you cut that.
Yeah.
Labor intensive, I see, yeah, okay.
This is the contract button that I had. Contractors, Pacific Naval Air Bases.
That's from Morris and Knudsen.
Yeah, well, Morris Knudsen was one of the big five contractors. And this, of course, carried all the way through. We did take a look at this.
That's those that were killed now.
Those are the ones that were executed. So that left me the last man off of Wake Island alive, because I was traded off and they were kept. And this is the affidavit of recovery of civilian repatriation form that they filled in when I...
A little difficult to see, but there's an affidavit. That's you when you were recovered,
And this is one of the hard copy books. The book I wrote in 1950, War and Waiting, and that is one of the original copies.
Now you're writing another book too, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So
is
that similar to that?
Well, it's going to be include the 50 years since then.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
What happened and how it affected the rest of my life.
Now here's some shells.
These are spent 50 caliber brass from Wake Island. They were picked up at Wake Island, so I don't know whether they were from ours or from theirs, but that's where they are.
Yeah. They made millions of them. And we should say this Bible here, that's interesting. Maybe you can hold it up for...
this Bible is a family Bible that I bought from one of the fellows at Wake Island. And it was a godsend because the print is large enough so that the fellows could read it without their glasses, and a lot of us, in fact, I read it through the first time I read the Bible through from cover to cover was while I was in prison.
Now, I think you mentioned, or maybe you've already mentioned it, that when you were captured, the Japanese took your glasses, the glasses of all the men. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You never got glasses anymore.
No,
what about dental care when you were a prisoner of war?
What do you mean, care?
Now,
we lost most of our teeth because of the rocks in the rice. You know, you'd break your teeth, and
how come they let you? How come you could get by keeping that all those different?
The only way I can explain it is that the Lord knew I had need of it, and He kept it for me.
They never took it away from you.
No.
No.
I was never challenged on that.
They just kept it, yeah.
No.
What about as you were at these camps and places where you had this Sunday service? Were you challenged on that much by the Japanese when you had to say
Well, we didn't have them. We weren't allowed to have it during the Japanese, but this is while we were still with the contractors at Wake Island.
What about when you were in camp in Japan? Did you have any church service of any kind or informal?
If more than two people got together, then the guard was right there to question what you're doing, you know. Mm-hmm. So they didn't want us to, there was no possibility for gathering in the prison camp.
Now, I believe, before we explain these things, you were at Nagasaki, and then you moved from Nagasaki. Could you tell us where you went then and what happened?
Well, we were working in the shipyards at Nagasaki.
What were you doing there? What kind of work?
Building ships. I mean, there were welders. I worked as ship carpenter. We had to keep the blocks shifted around underneath to keep the hull and the panels up so they could weld them together and all that kind of thing. And then there were people that welded and people that caulked and all that kind of stuff. And then there were a lot of us that they had straightening wire. They'd take number 9 wire that came in big rolls, and they'd throw it in the fire and take the temper out of it, and then we would cut it in lengths, and we'd sit there with hammer and straighten it out so they could use it for welding rod.
Well, for welding rod.
So we'd sit there on a piece of railroad rail with a hammer and straightening out these little pieces of wire that they'd cut and stuff like that.
Yeah. What kind of food did you get? What kind of ships were they building?
Well, I don't know what they were used for. And
I mean, they were big. They were big.
Yeah, they were regular ocean-going vessels.
Yeah, I see. Okay. Yeah. I mean, they weren't pleasure boats or anything.
Anyway, from there, we were taken out of there and taken over to Iwata on the 21st of June of 45.
21st of June.
So that was just 6 weeks before the bomb was dropped there on the 5th of August. But anyway, at Nagasaki, we, well, not Nagasaki, but at Oreo, over by Iwata.
Was this your last camp now before you were liberated?
Yeah. This is the last camp.
Yeah.
We were digging an air tunnel down to an old coal mine. See, as the coal mine moved underground, then they'd have to dig down new air tunnels, and we were working on that.
As an air tunnel to supply fresh air for the coal miners.
For the coal mine. Yeah. And we were down about a quarter of a mile on about a 45-degree angle, and we'd go down in, and then they'd back the train down, and we'd load the train, and they'd pull it out. And so we'd come up at noon, and they'd blast, and then we'd go back down in. Well, we got down in there one day, and they'd put 4 shots down at the bottom and 3 shots across the face, and well, this one up in the corner with a live cap with several sticks of dynamite on it hadn't gone off. And here we were between this railroad car in the face. There were 8 of us in there. And he takes this little air hammer and he goes in to dig out the cap out of this charge of dynamite that hadn't gone off. And needless to say, pretty soon he came out, I got it, I got it, I got it. He had the cap hanging on the...
Was that Japanese or American?
Japanese.
Yeah.
Yeah, so somebody had his hand on us with 7 sticks of dynamite and a live cap in there and a jackhammer. Why, that doesn't look like a good combination.
But you, sir.
And when the atomic bomb went off at Nagasaki, now we were about 100 miles from both of the bombs. And this exposed area from where the cars were, which wasn't shored up over to the face, was probably 36 feet in length. And when the bomb went off at Nagasaki, there was about 5 feet of rock came out of the unshored part there. And there were 8 of us in there, and none of us got a scratch. And just another miracle.
Was that was from the earthquake caused by the bomb?
By the bomb.
Yeah.
I mean, from the...
It shook the ground that much.
Shook the ground that much.
Did you know what it was?
Well, we had, from the time that we'd gotten the information smuggled into camp about that 2 planes had flown over Hiroshima and dropped 1 bomb and killed 65,000 people. Well, we didn't know just what they had in it, but we knew that something had happened. And
did you think the war was coming to a close now?
Well, we knew it was getting close, because in July of 45 they gave us a 70% ration cut. And then the food administrator of Japan committed harikiri. And what had happened was that the Japanese had the tunnel between Moji and the main island, which was built by American engineers, wasn't showing any traffic through the tunnel. So the Americans went in with aerial depth charges and torpedoes and opened up this tunnel to see what was going on. And the Japanese had enough rice stored in that tunnel to last their 100 million people for 4.5 years. And when we opened that up, why, then everything pointed to quits. And they gave us a 70% ration cut, you know. So we were out on the work party that we'd send a couple guys out scavenging for food and make a pot of stew every day out in the field, whatever we could get, you know.
They weren't as strict then, the guards and so on.
Well, they were as hungry as we were.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah. So that was another thing that we did.
Now I see it.
The bomb that was dropped at Nagasaki, when it left the Philippines on the Enola Gay, they had 2 targets. Primary target was Iwata. The secondary target was Nagasaki. And after they were in the air, they were given orders to take their secondary target because it was raining in Iwata and it was clear at Nagasaki. So I can truly say that I'm here because of a rainy day, because I was in Iwata.
Sure. Well, that's the luck.
Yeah. It's not the luck, it's...
What about medical care, dental care, and so on at these camp now?
None.
None whatsoever.
At Camp 18, just before we started to move, getting ready to move, they started giving us some vitamin B shots.
The Japanese?
Yeah.
Doctor or?
Yeah, Japanese doctors. But see, whenever they would move us, the guys would always try to make face so that we wouldn't have a bad impression of them when we left. And this was one of the things that they did was...
The guards would do that
Yeah.
to kind of make it
Yeah.
like they were too bad.
Try to make face, you know.
Sure. Now, at that camp, I see the big flag behind here. Could you tell us about
Well-
that flag, Rodney? I mean,
Well, when we, on the 29th and 30th of August, they started dropping food to us in red, white, and blue parachutes. That was
Americans did.
Yeah, that was at Camp 6 at Oreo. And Oreo is a suburb of Yawata. It's right on the edge. But then on the morning of the 1st of September, these two officers from camp came with an armful of parachutes and,
Americans or Japanese?
well, American. They were fellow prisoners.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, okay.
And I had, the fellows had rounded up a Japanese sewing machine, which I had been altering uniforms for the guys, you know, trying to make Army uniforms fit these skinny POWs. So I had this sewing machine, and so they came with this armful of parachutes and said, Rodney, can you make us a flag so we can raise it tomorrow morning when the Japanese surrender? So I said, I'll do what I can, and another fellow, Ryland Barnett, helped. He volunteered to help me, and well, the first thing, I hadn't seen an American flag in 4 years, you know.
Yeah.
And I'd never thought of trying to make one.
No.
And my mother had taught me how to cut a star out by folding a piece of paper, cut one side with the scissors, and you got a star. Well, we got our star pattern, and now the material, being nylon, was so flimsy that we had to figure out how we could stiffen it up. So we got some rice gruel, and we glued the material onto some cement sack paper with rice gruel so that it was stiff.
The
So-
red in the white there?
No, no, on the stars.
Oh, at the start, okay.
You can see the paper sticking out behind
Yeah,
the stars
sure,
there.
Yeah.
And so we cut the stars out. Well, we had to cut 98 stars because we couldn't sew them cut them in, we had to sew them on both sides.
Yeah.
Okay, then when I got the field made, then I figured, well, we got to have a red stripe at the top, otherwise it fades into oblivion, and one at the bottom.
Yeah.
Well, then we have to have a white stripe at the bottom of the field to complement that. So that gave us 7 stripes at the end of the field and 6 stripes below. So we divided up, got the width of the stripes at the end of the field and then extended it below. Well, then the next question was, how long from the field to the end of the flag? Well, my calculation was that if I took the width of the field and the 6 stripes below and extended them that distance, it would be about right. Well, that's what I did, but I find that I'm about a fold and a half short if we do it, if we fold the flag in the right manner. But then we proceeded to, and
Now, were the Japanese around you when you were making this flag?
no, because they had left camp on the 14th when they brought us in out of the coal mine.
On the 14th of
August.
August, yeah. So you were alone there then?
Yeah.
How did
So-
you get food then? Did Americans drop food to you?
Yeah, they dropped food and clothing in the red, white, and blue parachutes.
Yeah, I see.
So then that's where we got the material from. So then that we had that, so Barnett finished cutting the stuff by about 1 o'clock in the morning, and so I was doing the sewing, so I finished sewing the flag then about 2 o'clock on the morning of the 2nd, and I took it over to the officers, and so then when it came time for bugle in the morning, I was so shot that I couldn't even get out of bed. I just turned over and started sobbing, so I didn't even see the flag raised that morning, but it flew then over Camp 6 until the 13th of September when they got in to repatriate us.
I see, yeah.
And so this flag then, I didn't see it then from that time until I saw it displayed in Coos Bay, Oregon at one of the POW conventions. And I have no idea where it was or how it got there, but the Idaho Society had it on display there. Well, then we had a convention in Bismarck in 1992, and I said, I'll put the convention on, but I want one condition, that we display this flag at Bismarck. So it was displayed at the Heritage Center in August of 92 when we had our POW convention there. And then in 94, they wanted it at the bull session in Devil's Lake. So they arranged to bring it for the bull session in Devil's Lake, and the ex-POWs were having their convention 2 weeks later, so we agreed to keep it here until the POW convention was over in Jamestown. Well, when we got through with the bull session in Devil's Lake, Carl Blomquist turned the flag over to me because I was going to take it to Jamestown. Well, when they got to Jamestown and we were ready to close the convention there, why, the question came up, well, what do we do with the flag? And according to the agreement, we were supposed to send it to Idaho, and the service officer from VA service officer from Montana was there, and he asked me what I was going to do with the flag, and I said, well, I suppose we'll send it back to Idaho. And he said, well, you made it, didn't you? And I said, yes. Well, he says, then keep it. I said, you're crazy if you send it back to Idaho. So the more I thought about it, the more I thought it would be crazy to send it back. So
well, it's yours now. Yeah.
So I kept it, and since then I've gotten affidavits to verify that I made it and that it's my flag. So that has been resolved.
Now, getting back to the camp, that's camp number 6 there.
Yeah.
How many people were in that camp? How many POWs?
There's about 1,400. There's a lot of Dutch Javanese in there from.
And what was the first signal that the war was coming to a close, and that you indicated that the camp?
Well, you saw planes. You saw bombings. We'd come in at night, and the planes would come in, and you'd hear them drop their bombs. And in fact, on the 14th of August, when we came in from the camp, from the coal mine for the last time, I went out, had to get up in the night, and I went out, and just as I went out, why they'd bombed over the hills, and you could see the American planes flying out towards sea, and the Japanese had their spotlights on them, and the Japanese anti-aircraft was breaking about 2/3 of the way up there, so they were way above the anti-aircraft. And as they moved out down the valley out to sea, why, you could see the guys in the planes would blink their lights every time a new set of searchlights would pick them up, and just as if they were saying, "Have at it, boys."
What about the guards now? As the war was ending, how did they treat you? What happened to them? The guards that you had in that camp?
Well, when after we came in out of work on the 14th of August, why, the guards just disappeared. I mean, we were just running loose. We'd get on a train and went over and visit other camps and all kinds of stuff like that until they got in on the 13th of September.
There was no one around. You were scrounged for yourself then.
Yeah. When they dropped food on the.
What was there any defining moment when the war ended, as far as you were concerned, when the camp, say, exploded
Well,
euphoria, or that you?
Well, when they brought us in out of the coal mine, they said, you won't have to go to work anymore because the Americans have decided to make peace. So that
was the defining moment.
That was the defining moment, you know.
Yeah.
You know.
Now, did you write letters home when you were there, or get any letters from home?
When we were taken to Japan in October of '42, we were allowed to write a postcard home. Well, Mother got that in January of '43, and I got an answer. They got an answer back in July of '44.
I see. Did you get any so-called food parcels, cigarette parcels, or Red Cross parcels from the United States or the Red Cross?
At the end of December of the second year there in Sasebo, we were given one Red Cross parcel for each 3 people in camp.
The Japanese gave that to you?
Yeah, but there had been, another deal. The Red Cross had released 2,000 pounds of stuff for our camp, and we got 1 bag of sugar and 2 bags of cocoa.
I see.
50-pound bags of. That's all we got out of the 2,000 pounds that were.
Say, were there many POWs that escaped now in these camps that you were at that left the camp, that Americans would say?
Well, I've heard 4 or 5 that have escaped, but it was pretty hard. I mean, you're a Caucasian, and you're so obvious that you know there was no way of concealing your identity. So it was.
Well, as the war ended, now what happened then when you were liberated finally? How'd you get back to the States, and where'd you go?
Well, when we were released, then I was taken down. I went on a train down to Nagasaki and boarded the SS Haven, the hospital ship that was anchored in Nagasaki Bay, and I was there for 4 days. And when I checked on the ship, I weighed 175 pounds. And I was there 4 days, and I checked off, I weighed 135 pounds. They took off 5 gallons of water out of me. I had wet beriberi, and my blood was so thin that I couldn't get the water out of my body.
Were you sick?
Well, you're just zombie, you know. You go to sleep, if you didn't turn over, why one leg would be round like a stovepipe and the other leg would be natural.
That's what they call wet beriberi?
Yeah.
Were there other men that had that too?
Oh, yeah.
What is that, a disease or a parasite?
It's a lack of vitamins.
Lack of vitamins.
Lack of vitamin B, you know. That's the main lack of vitamin.
The ship cleared it up and...
Well, they just took that much water out, but when I went on down to the Philippines and was there at 29th place, they took us on a boat down to Okinawa, and then we flew from there down to the Philippines, and then we took a boat from the Philippines into San Francisco. And
did you go to a hospital there? Or?
No, they never.
Where did they check you out physically when you got after the end of the war?
They gave us a once over at Manila, but then nothing really.
Oh.
So we really didn't get any treatment until after we got back to the States and were turned over to the U.S. Department of Labor, and after we got all the red tape burnt, we were able to get.
Did you get back pay from the government? Give you back pay then for that time? And
no, we got. We got paid up until the contracts with the Navy were canceled. See, we were under contract to the Navy, and the Navy contracts were all canceled on the 31st of December.
1941.
41.
Yeah.
So we were paid 24 hours a day from December 7th until December 31st.
You didn't get any more pay then. What about pay when you were in prisoner of war?
Well, we never got anything.
You never got anything. Have you gotten anything since?
Well, no, not until we got VA benefits.
Yeah, yeah. And then when after you left San Francisco, you were discharged then, or went home?
Yeah, I went home.
To where to?
Well, I went back up to Idaho Falls, where my brother lived then, and then I took a train and went home to Millbank, South Dakota, where my mother was.
Where'd you get married?
Boise, Idaho.
And this is a family picture now. This was taken, of course, years later, but...
well, we were married in Boise, Idaho.
I see.
See, after I went back there, and then my wife, my fiance at that point, was teaching school in Sandpoint. So I went out there in 46.
Sandpoint, is that in Idaho? Or?
Sandpoint, Idaho. And there's where I wrote this book in 1946, where I wrote Work, For, and Waiting.
Yeah.
And then I went down to Boise. My brother was in Boise at that point, and so I bought a lot there and built myself a house, and then that winter my wife, her and her mother went to Sweden for a trip, and then the next spring, in the spring of 47, we were married in Boise.
Yeah. I'm assuming now from your name you're German.
Yeah.
Yeah, and your wife, you say, is Swedish. What about your two daughters now? Where are they still living?
Our daughter is in San Antonio, Texas, and our son is in Oklahoma City.
Oklahoma City. They're both well and so on. They both have families, or?
In fact, our daughter is in Powers Lake right now helping with harvest.
Oh, I see. Yeah, yeah. And that's the two children you have. Yeah. Is your wife still living?
Yes.
Yeah.
She's
the health of the family's been pretty good.
Chief cook and bottle washer for the combiners.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. And that's now Stanley is your home.
Yeah.
So I mean, and since now you've been fairly active in prisoner of war activities and community activities, and you've also been quite active in religious activities since you, well, of course, all your life, but especially since you got out of the service. And I believe you preached in different churches, or
well, for 20 years I did supply preaching in North Dakota. I think I preached in every Baptist church, and recently, well, within the last year, I was ordained as a priest in the Evangelical Episcopal Church, and so
that's the branch. Well, that is the English.
Well, the Episcopal comes out of the Anglican. Yeah.
Now, is that a fairly strong congregation?
Oh, yeah.
In North Dakota too, they have church?
Well, not in North Dakota. They're not in North Dakota.
In the east and so on.
Well, it's one of the fastest growing communions of churches in the world right now.
I see. Yeah.
Because it covers the three streams of the church: the liturgical, the evangelical, and the charismatic.
Yeah. What big projects do you have going on right now in your life? We'll say is that.
Well, the biggest project I got on right now is that I have believed that I have a directive from the Lord to see that this flag is displayed in the capital city of every state in the 50 states before it comes to rest in either Smithsonian or Andersonville or some other museum.
Yeah. Have you ever been to Andersonville?
No.
No, I haven't either. No.
But I mean, it's one of a kind. There's never be another one like it.
No.
I mean, it's an artifacts from World War II. It flew over Japan from the 2nd to the 13th of September.
Say, I want to bring this thing here out. It's rather good looking. Let me see if I can. This is a plaque here of medals and things.
Well, this is my discharge.
Well, just wait a minute till he gets the camera on there so he can. You can read what it says on top there first, because that's important. An honorable discharge, I think.
It's an honorable discharge from the Armed Forces of the United States of America. This to certify that Rodney Kephart, and it gives my social security name, was honorably discharged from the United States Navy, October 20, 1945.
And these medals here, campaign medals, one is from the Asiatic,
the American campaign, and the World War II medal. And this is the POW medal. And this is the only medal that was presented to me. The others were mailed to me. I received them in the mail.
Sure.
And,
well, you have a nice plaque there, Well, is there anything else you want to tell us, Rodney, about your life, or if you're going to live your life again, what would you do then? We'll say.
I'd probably do the same thing.
What about these? For you and I, we're older. What do you think about the young people in the United States now? If there was another war, do you think they'd be patriotic like they were in World War I, World War II, and so on? Or what do you think about the young people?
Well, the saddest thing about our younger generation is that they grew up without a father in the home.
Yes.
And a person that grows up without a father's nurture is a zombie. I mean, the father's nurture is what brings the spirit alive in a person. And unless that's done, they have what they call a slumbering spirit. They have no conscience of right or wrong. They have no conscience of time. They have no conscience of responsibility. I mean, they're just a zombie. And this is the problem with our country today.
What do you think would happen if we got into another big war? Do you think these young people would straighten out and be as patriotic as we are?
No, they don't have the foundation.
No.
I mean, they couldn't.
Do you think that foundation will be restored in one way or another in the future?
Well, we hope to. I mean, this is what the church is here for, to restore. In fact, I just spent 2 weeks in Spokane in school on counseling, how to deal with these kind of people. Get them back on the right track.
Well, Rodney, we want to thank you for coming here and visiting with us today here. And,
well, I hope
you had an interesting story, and when you leave here, we'll give you a tape, and I'll send one to your children and so on.
Well, I hope that what I have to say is helpful to help someone else along the way.
Well, I think we're going to... everyone's important in this world, and the story of anyone is important. So I want to thank you for coming, and wish you good luck for the rest of your life. Good luck on your trip home, and
thank you.
You bet. Stay out of trouble, as they say. Yeah, well, thanks a lot.
Thank you.